This is a story about inspiration and sportsmanship. It's the story of the Winnipeg Stellars, a junior men's basketball team that from 1949 to 1951 amassed an outstanding record of 67 wins with only 4 losses, winning back-to-back Canadian basketball championships. But let's start at the beginning. Shortly after the Second World War, 8 neighborhood boys in Winnipeg, aged 13 to 14, boys of different ethnicities and cultural backgrounds, started to play basketball at the Stella United Church in a dark and dingy gym that was only 25 by 35 feet, with 9-foot baskets and 11-foot ceilings. Little did they know they would go on to become a memorable team in Canadian basketball history. In 1948, the boys, now coached by Martin Terry and proudly calling themselves the Stellars, had entered the strong 9-team McGregor Armory League, and disappointingly did not make the playoffs. After their defeat, the boys practiced 2 times a week and diligently played pickup ball throughout the summer and into the fall. In 1949 to 1950, they again entered the 9-team McGregor Armory League, and this time, all their practice paid off. They lost only 1 game in the playoffs and then beat the Central City League, winning the city championship. But their luck didn't stop there. The Stellars went on to win the provincial championship and the Ontario Thunder Bay championship. Continuing their victorious journey, the Stellars traveled by train for weeks throughout the West and back, beating the Saskatchewan champs, the Alberta champs, and finally the British Columbia champs. Then, the Stellars returned to Winnipeg to play the Eastern Canadian champions, the Windsor AKOs, winning the 5-game series 3-1. Impressively, the Stellars closed their 1949 to 1950 season with a record 38 wins and only 3 losses. The road to their second Canadian crown was less imposing. The Stellars had 29 victories and remarkably lost only 1 game in league play. They won 10 straight playoff games against the University of Manitoba, the Brandon Comets, and the Calgary Freightways. Then, they traveled by train to St. John, New Brunswick, and beat the St. John Atlantics in 3 straight games. Completing their 1950 to 1951 season, the Stellars had a dazzling record of 29 wins and only 1 loss. But it was in their last game of the Seconds Championship that the Stellars' true sportsmanship would shine and inspire scores of teams that came after them. It was Thursday, April 12, 1951. A flood of injuries and fouls that began in the second minute of the game wrecked St. John's bid for the title. Halfway through the 4th quarter, when the Atlantics lined up with only 4 men after an injury, the Stellars coach pulled one of his own men off the floor, leaving his team with a 60-39 lead and a 4-man squad. From that point until the clock showed only 2 minutes to play, 2 more St. John's players fouled out, and as each was forced out of action, a Winnipeg Stellar left the floor. Close to 2,000 fans, roaring their approval at the Stellars' sportsmanlike actions, saw the game end with only 4 players, 2 to a side. Undoubtedly, the Stellars could have taken advantage of their opponents and scored over 100 points, but instead, they chose to play with integrity. A sports reporter at the game said, "Their magnificent gesture of sportsmanship is probably unparalleled in Canadian basketball." In fact, this remarkable display of the Stellars' sportsmanship would later lead to an official rule change that mandated a team had to have 5 players on the floor or default. The Stellars were inducted into the Manitoba Basketball Hall of Fame in 1984-85 and the Manitoba Sports Hall of Fame in 1995. But that might not be all for the Stellars. Urging the committee of the Canadian Basketball Hall of Fame to induct the Stellars, avid fan, the late Judge Myers, who compared the Stellars to the memorable team in the movie Hoosiers, wrote a letter stating, "It is my hope that Canadian basketball will, in its wisdom, recognize this amazing team for induction in its own Hall of Fame." All too often in sports, sportsmanship is lost. But for the Stellars, the remarkable young athletes who earned their victories with determination and class, it was their amazing sportsmanship that separated them from the rest, earning their place in Canadian basketball history, and with a little more luck, the Canadian Basketball Hall of Fame.